Hello, welcome to the History Channel. Here, we do not talk about distant empires. We talk about what happened on our own land. Today we travel to the wild north of Spain, where the Cantabrians and the Asturians resisted the conquest of Rome with tooth and nail. They were not marble heroes. They were real men and women who chose death over surrender. This is the story of Rome's last great war of conquest in the West, and it happened here, in Spain, in northern Spain. 1,929 years before the Common Era. This was not a land of consuls nor of laws carved in marble. It was a world of stone, wind, and silence, a place where a word was worth more than an edict, where death was an accepted fate, and where men lived by their oath. In the north of Hispania, beyond Roman control, the Cantabrians and the Asturians remained free, and Rome could not tolerate that. The southern lands were already part of the empire, fertile and wealthy, dotted with Roman villas, roads, and aqueducts. To the east, cities imitated Rome, forums, baths, and temples. But in the north, among the rocks of the Cantabrian mountains, the imperial eagle had not yet landed. What lived there was not Rome. They were unyielding Celts armed with spears, settlements protected by mist and guided by ancient gods. The Cantabrians and the Asturians did not understand empires. They were people, herders and warriors, mountain nomads, shaped by a harsh climate and constant struggle. They lived in fortified hilltop settlements, watching the valleys like vigilant wolves. They had no kings or senates. Each tribe decided for itself, and when war came, everyone fought, men and women, all adults. For them, freedom was as precious as blood, and they were ready to spill it. Meanwhile, Rome was changing. The young Octavian still had 2 years before becoming Augustus. He had defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. He was master of the world, except for one mountainous corner of Hispania that refused to recognize his authority, and that was unbearable. Not so much because of its strategic value, though it existed. The gold mines of Gallaecia were too close, but because of imperial pride. On his map there could be no stains, not even one. The war began as all wars begin. The Roman legions marched with confidence, proud beneath their golden standards and shining helmets. But soon they encountered something they did not understand. Instead of an enemy in open battle, they found emptiness, paths that vanished into the mist. Arrows flying from the forest, never revealing the hand that released them. Mutilated bodies along the roads left as warnings. This was not a war, it was a hunt, and the Romans were not the hunters. Octavian arrived in Hispania, and established himself near the front there, in hostile territory. He ordered the construction of camps and palisade fortifications. He commanded that 12 legions be brought, nearly 80,000 men, hundreds of horses, slingers, siege engines, and everything needed to break peoples who possessed almost no coinage or writing. But they had something else, the instinct to resist to the last man. The Cantabrians responded as only they knew how. They burned watchtowers, they ambushed patrols, and they vanished among the rocks. When captured, they drove daggers into their own throats before speaking. Some were left to starve in prisons. Others, faced with defeat, killed their women and children before surrendering. This was not just a war, it was a sentence. They knew that Rome did not forgive, and they had no intention of asking for mercy. First came the standards, then the supply convoys, then the wounded soldiers staggering along mountain paths with empty eyes. The war against the Cantabrians had no formations, no glory. Mud reached the knees, arrows struck from behind, and the enemy refused to show himself. It was like fighting the land itself, and the land does not surrender. Rome brought all its power. The legions dug trenches, built wooden walls, secured mountain passes where once there had only been oaks and mist. Roman camps began to appear bearing proud names and fluttering standards. But it was not enough. The Cantabrians were used to moving at night, silently, under the rain. They attacked in small groups like wild animals and vanished without a trace. This was not strategy, it was instinct. The Romans struggled to adapt. Legionaries could not advance in tight formations through the gorges. Carts sank into the mud. Messengers disappeared among the trees. Every legion that entered that world did so knowing it might never see the sun again. One of the most striking episodes was the siege of Aracilum, a Cantabrian stronghold perched on a mountain surrounded by several Roman legions. The Cantabrians resisted without water or food, defending themselves with spears and stones. The Romans built walls around the fortress itself. Legionaries dug trenches, they cut off supplies, they waited, and when the defense finally collapsed, they did not find surrender. They found only corpses, men, women, even children. All had chosen death over submission. In Rome, songs of victory were sung, but no soldier celebrated that massacre. The war lasted far longer than expected. Every Roman victory was a blow. Every destroyed Castro was a spark for a new uprising. Augustus, weakened by illness, left the front and handed command over to his generals, yet even then the resistance did not stop. At Lancia and at Mons Medulius, on every rock of the north, Cantabrians and Asturians continued to fight. Some prisoners were crucified to spread terror, others were sold into slavery, and still the attacks did not cease. It was like cutting off the heads of a hydra. Desperation forced Rome to use weapons not made of steel but of hunger. Fields were destroyed, wells were poisoned, entire villages were burned to deny the enemy resources. The Cantabrians, faced with death by starvation, learned to survive on the absolute minimum. Some ate roots, boiled tree bark, some hid in caves, others climbed high into the mountains beyond the reach of the invader. The land became an ally of the rebels and an enemy of the empire. Even animals took part in this war. Roman chronicles mention herds of wild horses released into the valleys to hinder troop movements. The mountain people knew every crack in the terrain. They set traps along the roads, threw stones from above, triggered landslides. Every Roman movement was watched. Every lit fire was a signal. They did not fight for a king, nor for a city. They fought for their home, for their freedom, and that made them invincible, even as they died one by one. Legionaries began to fear this campaign more than any other, worse than Germania, worse than any previous war. Here there was no glory, there was only fear. When a soldier closed his eyes at night, he heard the whistling of Cantabrian spears like ghosts in the mist. Many wrote letters to their families with no hope of returning, because this war had no clear end. Only when the land was completely devastated, and the population of the north began to fall silent from sheer exhaustion, in the year 19 before the Common Era, after nearly a decade of uninterrupted campaigning, Rome officially declared that the Cantabrian Wars were over. The next day, Augustus returned to Rome as a victor. The Senate dedicated altars to him, coins were minted, peace was proclaimed, but it was a lie. Rome did not conquer northern Hispania, it destroyed it. The Cantabrians signed no treaty, they did not march in chains through the streets of Rome, they gave no hostages and swore no loyalty to the emperor. They simply stopped fighting because there was nothing left. Their castros were burned, their fields were destroyed, their dead lay unburied. Hispania, the chronicles said, had been completely subdued, but the soldiers who were there knew the truth. Nothing about it resembled victory. To ensure that such resistance would never rise again, Augustus imposed a policy of total control. He founded new cities with purely military functions, Asturica Augusta, present-day Astorga, and Lucus Augusti, present-day Lugo, two fortresses from which to watch over a people who, though broken, were never fully conquered. Many of the survivors were deported. Others were forced into the auxiliary units of the Roman army and sent to fight in the farthest reaches of the empire. Ironically, some Cantabrians eventually served in Britannia, fighting peoples who resembled them more than their new masters. But there was something Rome never managed to destroy: pride, memory, the wound. For while official chronicles praised Augustus, the oral tradition of the north preserved another version, one in which the land was not defeated, but worn down by time, abandoned by the gods, yet resisting to the very end. For centuries no one spoke of them. Not Plutarch, not Suetonius, not Tacitus. This brutal war was inconvenient. The truth was ugly. It did not fit Rome's image as the civilizer of the world. And so, the greatest act of resistance in the history of Spain was buried beneath centuries of oblivion. Until one day, many centuries later, during excavations on a hilltop, someone uncovered traces of a wall blackened by fire, and beyond it, skeletons bearing marks of violence, women with daggers still clenched in their hands, skulls pierced by nails, bodies intertwined, unyielding, unsubdued, only dead but with clenched teeth. Today, when you visit these lands, when you walk through the valleys of Liébana, the mountains of Asturias, the heights of Palencia or Leon, you see no legions and no castros, you see silence. But if you listen closely, among the trees the wind still carries ancient names, names Rome tried to erase, names that endured. The memory of the Cantabrians still whispers through the winds with the unbroken dignity of those who resisted to the end. Because history is not written only by the victors, it is also recorded by those who die standing.